very briefly before the panel, I'd like to set it up with a few of our research findings about district level impacts. So, as we move through the day, you've heard about impacts of the COATSIM program. You've got classrooms with increasing instructional capacity. You've got schools where you're scaling up the momentum. What can you do, especially when the COATSIM cohorts are no longer active, to scale that impact up and sustain it at the district level? So that's what we're going to have our panelists addressing. From the research, we found that districts who were coming out of having COATSIM cohorts had some interesting strategies for investing really significant amounts of their own resources to scale up and sustain some of the professional learning practices they learned from the art of teaching. And I think that's the strongest proof possible, really, of how much districts value this work, is that they're putting their own skin in the game. They're saying, you know, this is now how we're going to do business, and we're reconfiguring our own professional learning systems to reflect some of these things that we've found effective. And I can't tell you how rare that is. One of the last panelists referred to that rubber band impact, and it's just so common for outside initiatives to come in and, you know, lots of work, lots of excitement, but when the money goes and when the direct support goes, that's it. And that's really not been the case in the COATSIM districts that I've looked at. We've done 2 intensive case studies looking at district level impact, and also heard from the whole alumni mentor population on these impacts. Just a couple things, and you'll hear more about this in detail from the panel. But some of the big ways we've seen of districts essentially taking the work in-house. The biggest one is investing to scale and sustain the coaching model. I think any district that has worked with COATSIM has come to see the power of coaching and has come to say, where can we find resources in our professional development budget to shift them towards coaching? Because that's really where the rubber meets the road in classroom practice. That's really where change happens. There's also been a shift, they've told me, in how they use coaching. Coaching is often used, it's often a deficit model, right? I mean, you're often assigning coaches to teachers that are perceived as weaker and filling gaps here and there. And what I've heard from districts that they've learned from COATSIM is the idea of coaching to strengths, so building on strengths, but also coaching for coherence. So it's not just that one-on-one relationship, but thinking about how can coaches work with both individual teachers and teams of teachers to develop signature practices, things that we as a district have decided are what great instruction looks like. And that's the last thing, is that a lot of you, the panelists, will talk to us about how their district has gone from, one of them described it to me as a potpourri approach of PD, where you may have lots of sweet-smelling petals of different kinds, but saying, no, we're going to do roses. We're going to really focus in on these 2 or 3 things, and we're going to achieve mastery. We're going to get really great at these things. So at this point, we've got our district panel here. I'd like each of you to just give a minute or 2 on your history with COATSIM. A lot of you have some interesting multi-district history with COATSIM, and then talk about how your professional learning systems are different from having worked for COATSIM. But let's first go down the line and just have an introduction.
Thank you. My name is Greg Franklin. I'm the superintendent at Tustin Unified School District, and COATSIM's made a huge difference in my own personal career. When I landed at Los Alamitos Unified, it was well embedded and making a big difference. And I had the opportunity to work with Sherry Kropp and a great team. And then when I left, Sherry Kropp became the superintendent. She's going to talk to you about COATSIM. And then I went to Tustin, and COATSIM was well embedded and on its way and doing great. And the person in charge there was Julie Mitchell. And so I keep taking credit for the great work that these people are doing. It's fantastic. But one of the really interesting things is that the lessons we learned from Coatson, both at Los Al and Tustin Unified, we passed a really big bond measure strictly on technology in 2012. And exactly what Catherine mentioned, we knew that when we were going to put a personal device in the hands of every kid, when we did that, we had to make it an instructional initiative, not a technology initiative. And the way to do that is to focus on the pedagogy. And so we took what we knew about coaching and the lessons we learned from Coatson and applied that to our what we call digital learning coaches. And it just made all the difference. And we've evolved from there since then, but I just can't thank Jerry and Mrs. Coatson and the Coatson Foundation enough. It's really has been a game changer for so many teachers and kids' lives.
Good morning. My name is Tracy Camilli. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services in Culver City. And I think I'd like to position myself on this panel as the newbie, and in being the face for those of us who are just a couple of years out of Coatson, or just recently just having that experience of we've had an amazing experience of direct support, of active involvement, of Coatson support, and all of this now what questioning of our role as an alumni. How do we take the wonderful learning that our direct fellows have experienced, and then how do we scale that up to the rest of our teachers who perhaps are now ready for more direct support, when at the very beginning they were too afraid to raise their hand for that. So we are a little, I would say, kind of still a little in the process of developing a bit of coherence and clarity around that process, but I'm happy to share where we currently are in that experience. I would love to say that in our conversation, we had a planning meeting, little group conference call last week with my distinguished colleagues here, and I was listening thinking, this is what I want to be when I grow up. This is what I want to be. There's some wonderful learning going on here, and a lot of us can look forward to say, just one step at a time, this is where we are right now, but one day maybe we could do that. So I want to thank my colleagues for the learning I've been hearing.
My name is Julie Mitchell, and I'm the superintendent in the Roland Unified School District. And as Greg had mentioned, my relationship with Coatson began when I was in Tustin. So Coatson had approached the district, and we had engaged in some conversations, probably 2007, about the work and the potential to really transform teaching and learning. And so that was one of the great responsibilities that I had, was working with our principals, and then in turn they working with mentors and with fellows, and building a strong relationship with the Coatson Foundation. And then I had the great fortune to be selected as the superintendent in the Roland Unified School District, who had a history of working with the Coatson Foundation, and it had fizzled a smidge. And so I took the opportunity of those relationships and that time to reignite the work that had taken place in the district, and to start it again, and to begin a new phase of our schools going through and having the opportunity to re-engage in that learning. I can say that through both school districts, it has profoundly changed the conversations and the opportunities for educators and for students. And so I look forward to sharing whatever I can offer.
Hello, my name is Sherry Krupp, and I'm the superintendent in Los Alamitos Unified. And I've been in the district since 1985, so I haven't gone anywhere else. And we've had our first Coatson school about 15 years ago. And now all of our elementary schools became Coatson schools in about 5 years. And so when I get asked, especially by Jerry one time, maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, what really changed? And I think my answer was everything. And so when I think about just the culture of how we approach everything, it's changed. So for us, test scores matter, absolutely. But what I've learned for sure is that test scores, our connection with kids, our love for kids, good teaching and learning, love of learning, they're not mutually exclusive. They can be all of those things. And what Coatson has really given us is a culture of learning for everyone. So I sort of think of it like, and I think our culture does too, that people are where they're at. You know, you inherit some have been you forever, we've hired some are veterans, and our job is just to find ways to motivate them, to inspire them, to want to get a little bit better. And if everybody in the organization gets a little bit better and continues to be a learner, I think it can really improve. So you can learn from your mentors for sure, and from fellows, and from veteran teachers, and from new teachers, and from Coatson. So I would say it's really just made us all open to be learners from everywhere, all the time.
Thanks. So I asked the panel in advance to think about and respond to this specific question. What's different about your district's approach to investing in professional learning because of your experience with Coatson? And we're going to go sort of in order of seniority. So we're going to, in terms of how long they've worked with Coatson or how long ago. I like that. Yeah. Just be clear about that. So we're going to start with Sherry, whose district has the longest history, and wind up with the newbie, as she described herself. So Sherry.
Okay. And I'm probably the oldest too, so I like going first. And I'm just going to take my time, but I'm not really. So, you know, I wrote a lot of ideas down. And I think I've already said it. It really has changed everything. But what it's done is build capacity. You know, when you talk to teachers and students and what you want the best for them, what's really important is their self-efficacy. So when you use a Coatson model, which really looks at how we can do long-term, sustainable professional development where everybody gets better. So one of the results that you get is that your students learn to be more resilient, more excited about learning, and they have a greater sense of what they believe they're capable of. And that makes all the difference. But what you also get is teachers experience that. And so when you are a teacher, and whether we haven't had mentors or fellows for years now, maybe a decade. And so, but what's sustainable is that everybody can be a mentor and everybody can be a fellow. And so I'll share one thing that's really evolved in our district that is one of the things I love the best. Well, two things. One is we all have great people. They're everywhere. So I think sometimes my role now, as it's evolved and in a different role than when we started, is almost just get out of their way, get to yes, and just support the excellence that you have because it's everywhere. And then most recently, it's now been about 4 years, we created what we call LoSal Connects. And so that might be one evolution that I can share because I know all of us have so many things in common that we can share. Is that we started LoSal Connects and it's offered during the summer and during the year on a student-free day, and there's variations of that. And so teacher leaders step forward, and a teacher leader is all of us, right? Everyone can be a leader. And so sometimes we go and ask a teacher that's never been a presenter, come on, will you come present? You're really great at this. And then they do. And so then there's a list of things, and unlike a potpourri, there's a method to what's offered. There are lessons in your signature practices or initiatives or technology that you need to improve teaching and learning. And then teachers can sign up, similar to if you go to a professional outside conference. And then they get a schedule for the day that lists exactly where they're going, what time slots, they may include demonstration lessons, and that has really been a game changer. And when veteran teachers volunteer to go to these events, and in the summer, with nobody gets paid. So when people volunteer thousands of hours, I think that speaks volumes because that's how much they value it. So, thank you.
I have more seniority than Julie.
We're going to give it to you, Greg.
Thank you. So what we learned during, I think, from Coatson and the financial crisis, right? Never let a great crisis go to waste. When our resources diminish, we have to become more focused in what we do with our resources. Just like Coatson. So focus on a signature practice for a couple of years, go deep. And so we started doing that in both LoSal and Tustin Unified, identify signature practices that we're all going to agree we're going to get better at, become expert at, spend time on, and don't let the staff get whipsawed back and forth, and now we're doing this, now we're doing that, and keep the focus narrow and go deep. The second thing we learned is we have a lot of practices and structures in place that we can use without adding anything and just use it better, right? And so if we have these narrow things that we're going to really get better at and go deep in, let's use every opportunity that already exists to take advantage of that. And so things like every late start is focused on signature practices or early release, whatever we do. Our PD days. We now have everybody with devices. Why not do online? We offered online PD. Nobody got paid. Same idea. We had about 25% of our elementary teachers sign up the first offering. Master classes. We have 3 PD days during the school year. And to go deep, we said if you want to do the same thing over the course of those 3 days, sign up for this master class in whatever the area is that you have interest. And so instead of doing the one-day shots, they're doing a 3-day across the year program. Summer labs. We have summer school for our neediest kids. The kids are struggling in reading and writing. And so we use that as a lab opportunity. So concurrent to the summer school, we run PD on the workshop model, and then we come in and we watch it happen in the lab, and then debrief, and reflect, go back, do it again. Our induction program takes all of the things that we're doing in our signature practices and embeds them. Staff meetings. We don't do staff meetings much anymore to talk about the parking lot, and, those things. The staff meeting time has become really an extension of PD. And one of the things we learned about this, being jealous of every opportunity as well, and I heard somebody in the last panel use the voice and choice language, and if we want kids to have voice and choice, teachers need voice and choice. And so for the first time we said to teachers, it was an innovation day is what we called it. We have some teachers doing this 20% time, where the kids can work on a project that they're interested in. And so we said, teachers, you can do that. Tell us what your PD is. You have to do it with more than one partner. You have to do it with a group. And spend the day to get better at something. Just tell us what it is. And so being jealous, really jealous of every opportunity and structure that exists to advance your initiative, I think is what we've learned. And the final thing is, when we first started our coaching model post-Coatson, or even parallel to Coatson as we were going to expand it, we used the same language. We had mentors, we called them coaches, we had fellows, people had to fill out an application to apply. We got about half of our teachers trained officially through that process in our digital initiative. But eventually, you run out of volunteers. Right? So then the big question is, how do you catch up the rest of them? And so our model has evolved to 6-week cycles of grade level teams. So now your grade level is going to get a 6-week coaching cycle. It still has the plan, act, reflect, but you're doing it with your 2nd grade cohort. And so everybody in the 2nd grade gets the training. And that's been a really good way to catch up some of the people who didn't volunteer. They also then have this symbiotic and synergistic relationship with the grade level team that when the coach goes away, the learning continues to happen. And so that's been a success. And I don't think we could have gotten there, absolutely couldn't have gotten there without Coatson doing its thing with us first.
Great. So in the Roland Unified School District, we have really invested in having a common goal, a common purpose. So we collaboratively and collectively developed our RUSD framework for teaching and learning. Looked at our past practices, looked at best practices, looked at research-based practices, and developed it together with a group of all of our principals, and then did the same process with our coaches, our instructional coaches, and then did the same process at each school site. The principals led that with their with their teachers, so that we now have and are able to look at teaching and learning with a common lens, and that has helped our work profoundly in guiding away from potpourri, because we had a wonderful opportunities for our teachers to engage in professional learning, but it was a potpourri model. And we had pockets of genius throughout the district, but we didn't have cohesion. So one of the things that we're also talking about and always working on is how do we support the work? And so we support our principals through that work with principal leadership development. Those are our principal meetings. And then we also do have instructional coaches on each of our campuses. And our same as Greg has mentioned in terms of the work on early release or late start days, that work is centered around professional learning, all tied back to the framework for teaching and learning. We also have signature practices, so our schools are talking common language, having common ideas. Also looking at creating an overall culture of learners, that learning is not just for students, it really is for everyone. And so making sure that when people do go to outside events or participate on other things, that they come back and they share that learning. We've also been working through and really strongly implementing getting to yes. And many of our teachers just need permission. Greg said sometimes, you run out of volunteers. But if you can help them and support them and let them take their idea and grow it and give them the permission to take risks. Our principals have absolutely been instrumental in the work, and making sure that they have the support to lead the work has been key. It is an expectation that they model this work, that they take the risks, that they are there right beside teachers, learning, trying, experimenting, failing forward, picking up and trying it again as we go. And so I think overall, the pieces that we're working on and working towards are very instrumental and have come to our district from COTSN. Many of the models, a lot of the framework, the conversations have been very much modeled after and working with what has started with COTSN.
Thank you for that, Julie. That's exactly what we'd like to do, to be able to do. I think that as we are a couple years out, what we did a few years ago, and Jerry mentioned it, alluded to it earlier, after our first year, two of our schools were participating in the COTSN Fellowship, I think in 2012, and in 2013, a Phase 2 was developed. And the Phase 2 program, if you will, dealt with what do you do with those teachers who want to now be a part of the signature practice that these 5 teachers at my school are getting, but not me. So with that, we invited teachers to participate. At that time, I was an elementary site principal who had not yet been in, we were not one of the participating schools, but I was able to see this kind of rolling in, phased in approach. And so across the board, the first 2 years were at 2 sites, and then I was in the second round. My school and another school, there were 2 of us that were in at that second time. So if you can imagine this kind of phased in or tiered in approach where there's active COTSN support for the fellows, and then through some grant funding and through district support, a Phase 2. And we, at our district, we had just focused across the board. We're a small district, and we had just dedicated ourselves to mathematical practices. So we contracted out with some wonderful consultants through COTSN to provide 4 days of CGI training for our teachers in Phase 2. They also provided some coaching, but not as intensive as the mentor teachers. So it was a little bit of a scaffolding. And so if you can imagine that you have a group of teachers who are receiving intensive support, and those are going to become our teacher leaders to help guide the second round, the phase 2 teachers who really got, if we bring the coaches and we develop the capacity of our coaches to keep moving teachers along the continuum. I loved that idea of the continuum, the readiness, as opposed to, I think one of our earlier panels had talked about this idea of readiness. Every teacher, all of us, even the coaches and the site admin, they're all at different levels of readiness, right, depending on their context. So being able to kind of metacognitively identify where they are in that readiness and to be able to get to yes to say, this is what I want to do, let's focus on that. All with this idea, with this end in mind of creating this amazing student-centered teaching for understanding kind of a framework. So as we've gone from looking at CGI math and the practices that are so powerful for our students within the context of math, expanding that to this idea of it being an instructional practice that goes across content areas, our district has kind of engaged in I would say, an encouragement of our teachers to look beyond math if they're ready and to go into other practices. And so our coaches, we have rebranded them. They're teaching and learning partners to kind of help soften the idea that some people got stuck on the word coach. Some people got stuck on the idea of mentor. I love both of those terms, and so some of us do still use mentor, some of us still use coaching. But this idea of it being a partnership, a teaching and learning partnership for a teacher wherever they are on that journey to move themselves forward. Now, our teaching and learning partners, our coaches engage their staff through surveys, and they provide them with multiple points of entry in order to receive that direct support. So realizing that direct support is time and labor intensive, and you can't get to an entire staff that way. The people who choose to go through that cycle, but there's another layer, there's a differentiation. There might be those who just want to come for maybe a book study, or may just want resources. Wherever they are, we offer ourselves as coaches and as site, and then the site administrator is there to ensure that every teacher is at least taking the risk that they feel comfortable with. We also at the same time are engaging with sub-days for involving teachers to go to see their peers, and so we have these monthly it might be a roving sub where they're able to go into the classrooms, and I'm sure that that's a practice that many of us are engaging in. We're also really finding a lot of value in instructional rounds of vertical articulation going K through 12, so our 12th grade teachers, our AP Calc teachers are going into the kindergarten classrooms to see that kind of wonderful instruction going on. And then the lab days, which are supported by our alumni grants through COATS and are really helping us move the conversation forward. And then I guess finally, understanding that as we develop the capacity of our teachers, we have to also just be super intentional in developing the capacity of our coaches and where they are, and as well as our site administrators. So we've really taken advantage of the leadership training provided by COATSN. And I can't highly recommend enough the series where the coaches and the administrators are receiving differentiated coaching support so that we have different conversations depending on the readiness level or the mindset of the partner with whom they are. So I think we've got a lot of work still ahead of us. I would say that my final closing is to say that we are still at this level where people are sharing where their comfort level is, and that is going to help develop a little bit of that coherence for us to move forward to have those signature practices that hopefully in the next year or so we'll be able to have.
Thanks. We have just a few minutes for questions, so who would like to start?
Thank you. I actually have two questions. One is very easy. For the summer labs, were teachers there on a volunteer basis, or were they paid to be there?
In Tustin, we pay them a stipend to participate in summer training.
Okay, thank you. The other one is, with districts having multiple initiatives and trying to avoid the puppery approach that we're all now going to do, right? How does the district provide training to those teachers that may want to take maybe the writer's workshop instead of the CGI map as their goal for the year?
Typically, we get principals usually work with their staff, and then, you know, collaboration sometimes gets messy, and so they come together with what their focus is going to be. And then initially it might be one thing, but after everyone has a certain level of expertise and new people are receiving it through a different model, they all can get it. And then on your summer lab, we pay the people leading the presentations a stipend and not the participants. So I think, but that's evolved over the years.
In Tustin, we do the same thing, that a school selects a signature practice so that your colleagues are going, and it's not the principal decides, just like Sherry described, you get the team together, what do you think will get the biggest bang for our effort this year? And we're going to stick to it for a couple of years.
So in Roland's saying, the signature practice was decided by the school, and so there is support towards that signature practice and professional development and the conversations that they're having on their school site. But there are teachers who, yes, my signature practice is mathematical practices or writing a reading workshop, but I'm also interested in something else. And so they have that opportunity to engage in their own personal learning as well, to either continue, because they maybe are already part of that potpourri where that was a real strength of theirs and they want to continue that learning. But as a school, they're going deep and really analyzing and working on their understanding around their focus area.
Same thing in Culver City, and just those who have had more expertise and more time in math over the last 5 years have now branched out and are moving into literacy with maybe a language development focus. And so it really does, though, have to. I think I would recommend that the site administrators work with their ILTs to kind of develop that focus, and that either at the end of the year for the following year, or at the starting again at the very beginning of the year, and say, this is where we're going to spend our early release time to really get ourselves off the same page.
I think too, like we have 4 different focus areas in the district that we work through, and so again, there may be a teacher that across schools within the district, they engage in a lot of conversations as well. So they're sharing resources across the district now as well. So again, I might have this focus in this particular school, but I know my friend teaches over there, and they're sharing all sorts of resources.
And I would add that it doesn't really matter what you want to get better at. They'll sweat about, should we pick this one or that one? It doesn't matter. Pick something to get better at, and that process of getting better at something makes you better at almost everything else. You just get this efficacy that Sherry talked about.
And I'll add too, it's a really weird side benefit because I'm not as fluffy as this will sound. But when you get people to collaborate on anything, you also get them to spend time together. They have a greater chance of knowing one another. They have a greater chance of really genuinely liking one another and having a deeper understanding. So you get a benefit in that as well, regardless of what they pick as what signature practice they want to attack.
I just wanted to add one quick point, something that I have observed in all of your districts, is there's a real advantage to having a staff having choice and voice to come up with that signature practice. But another advantage of that is, and I watched this in your districts, all at Culver City you were all math, but the others were across the board, is that if you're at school A and you focused on math, and school B, a mile away, focused on writer's workshop, your teachers over time can visit each other. And you're not driving an hour to see a practice when it's right there in your backyard. Okay, other questions?
I feel a little guilty for speaking, but I just wanted to mention that I think it's really important that when a teacher says to us that they want to learn something else, that we provide those opportunities for them to learn. Because what ends up happening is that they're not only focused on teaching mathematics in a way that is focused on student thinking, that they're also interested in teaching reading and writing the same ways. And that once that teacher embraces both approaches, balanced literacy and CGI, others want on board. And that comes, when teachers are excited about teaching, others want to join them. So that becomes sort of the selling point for the practices in and of themselves. So I think that's something that I've heard so much today, is that teachers get excited about learning and so that others want to join them.
Absolutely. And there was a question that Mrs. Coatson had for the first panel, so that we have fairness and the same questions and equity, we will ask this panel, what could we do with our alumni that we could support more? How can we support?
Sure.
There you go.
So actually, I wish that, there's so many great elementary schools, and I wish every school could be a Coatson school, but I actually think it'd be sort of great too to come back even 10 years later and revisit. But that being said, I'm taking this split second just to say with alumni, anything Coatson could support, and even if it just went up to middle school, you can change the world. So, it changes everything in elementary, and the exponential growth you get working with Coatson. Even if you have funding for other things, there's just something about that cohort, that model, that's really powerful. But short of that, I'm still so grateful, and if that never happens, still nothing but love. So,
in terms of reiterating the secondary needs as well, that is a big need, and we have all learned so much from our relationship and our work with Coatson, and I believe that we've all done small pieces to infuse that learning into secondary instruction in secondary schools. But there's a huge piece that's missing, and that is the Coatson piece that's there. And so if there was ever the way to entertain growing that, particularly when you look at the learning opportunities that our youngest learners have in elementary, and then moving, we need to focus, and just even if it's a think tank, an opportunity to talk together around how can we do it, even if it's something that we come together and do ourselves again, but looking through that. And then I would just like to applaud you and Coatson for the work around talking about that third year, talking about that continued support. The grants are outstanding because it keeps the conversation going. It's very important. I think one of the things that everyone, our principals in our schools make and need to always continue to make is that conscious effort for staff cohesion, making sure that it is not an us versus them, or you're Coatson, I'm not, you're a fellow, I'm not. And then if you were not selected or were not ready to be a fellow at the time Coatson was there, providing that opportunities for that learning to continue and to grow, and it's not just a 2-year experience.
Thank you. Any other questions before we close this section? Okay. Very, very good. Let's give them a nice big round.